Hi, I'm Stephanie Schierholz. I'm the social media manager at NASA headquarters in Washington, and this is an exclusive interview for Digital Brand Marketing Education.
So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I am the social media manager at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. So broadly, that means that I oversee all of NASA's social media efforts across the entire agency. It doesn't mean that I'm actually managing all of those accounts. We have more than 250 social media accounts agency-wide, but it means I'm taking the big picture view and I'm looking at things also like the administrative side of it, like policy and regulations, guidelines, those types of things. But I also am directly responsible for the @NASA account, the primary Twitter handle for NASA, which has more than 1.6 million followers, and NASA's primary Facebook page, facebook.com/NASA, and a couple of the other accounts like our Foursquare partnership that we have where you can check in and find tips from NASA. So those types of things.
Tell us a little bit about some of the previous jobs that you held prior to what you're doing now.
Sure, and I'll also tell you how I ended up at NASA too. So I got my first job as an internship at a place called the Space Foundation, which is a space advocacy group. When I was in college, I interned for them. I was always interested in space. So it was a good fit, and it sort of reawakened my love and interest in all things space. I spent 8 months in Germany, and then when I came back, the Space Foundation hired me back in a different role to help promote the new plan that the president had just announced. That would be President Bush, and at the time it was the plan to go back to the moon and go on to Mars. So I worked specifically on that program, and then the Space Foundation promoted me to their manager of communications and then to their director of communications. And I started working a lot more with NASA in my role there. And so somebody said, you should apply for NASA. I never thought that it was something that would be an option for me. And so I thought, well, I'll apply. And I applied 4 times before I was actually hired by NASA.
That's great.
And back then I got hired as a public affairs specialist, so social media job didn't exist then. I think Twitter was announced in a couple months after I first got the job, but I didn't even know about it back then. So I was hired as a public affairs specialist, and until just a few weeks ago, actually, I had dual roles where I was also acting as an agency spokesperson in that capacity.
Wow, that's great. See, now one of the things that I kind of like that you were telling us a little bit about is that social media didn't really have a role at the time that you were coming on board with NASA. And so one of the things I'd love to know about is a little bit is, so what role does social media play in your current profession? How has it changed since you were first hired till now?
Sure. Well, so when I was first hired, it was 2007, and NASA, as far as I know, didn't have any social media presence at all, and it wasn't even on our radar. It was in mid-2008 that it really came on the radar for NASA. Veronica McGregor, who's at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, was the one who really sort of dipped the toe in the water for NASA and set up the Phoenix lander account. And it was wildly popular for Twitter at the time. It was the 3rd most popular account on all of Twitter with a whopping 75,000 followers. So that proved to us, as a case study that it was a valuable way of reaching out. And the NASA account was set up in late 2008, early 2009 is when we really started using the Twitter account. And it was very basic at the time. There were a few of us who were assigned to, experiment and try it out. And I was sort of the one who was most active, and because I was the person who was most active, I just sort of grew into the role of social media. So I guess the professional life lesson is if you become the one making all the suggestions, you will end up with the job. And similarly, that can work both ways, right? If you want to do something, it's a great path to doing it is to actually, take the initiative and just start doing something. And if you, if it's an undesirable job, quit doing it. Otherwise, you'll get stuck with it because you'll be the expert anyway.
So on a daily basis, how does it change the way that you personally as a professional communicate?
Yeah, I mean, social media has really revolutionized the way that we do PR. I have a PR background. One of my undergraduate degrees has an emphasis in public relations, and I've always been a public relations professional. So, the idea of how do you think as a communicator and what tools are you using was NASA has a mandate in the 1958 Space Act that we should communicate what we're doing as widely as possible. And so that gives us the mindset that we need to be looking for new ways to communicate. Also because NASA can't advertise, that's not an avenue that's open to us that most, companies and PR, advertising, marketing professionals have that avenue. We don't. PR professionals are used to putting out a news release and waiting for somebody to call you. Or maybe you pitch the story to a couple of reporters. But with social media, it is all about the conversation and engaging and having that two-way dialogue. And so, we don't have to go through a reporter anymore to tell the story that we want to tell. And that's a different way of thinking about the way that you engage. But there's some really cool things that come out of that. For example, instant feedback. And you can become a better communicator by paying attention to what resonates with people, what they're interested in. So it's still, your training as a communications professional still comes into play because you still need to be creative and think about drawing people in. You also can't, you can't do this is the best ever all the time, right? Because you have to create a relationship with the people that you're engaging with on social media, and so you can't tell them every day, this is the best thing ever, right? Because then they're going to not believe you and walk away and not click on anything anymore. So
what's another social media that you may have been using, a tool or something personally that you're finding interesting right now?
So right now, the thing that we're playing around with the most is Google+. And, both me on my personal account and then the agency set up an account, but we haven't really done a big sort of push for, hey, we have Google+, because we want to have a chance to figure it out a little bit. That is the downside to getting really big, right? Now that we have 1.6 million followers on Twitter and, more than 500,000 on Facebook, you can't experiment as much as you used to because it's a much bigger audience and many more people watching you if you fail. So you have to be a little bit more strategic and careful about the risks that you're taking and the experiments that you're doing.
So you really quarterback these things. You're the one that's seeing them from, something that just kind of jumps on your radar to the functionality to execution. This is really one of your functions there is to go through this process and is it useful? How is it useful? And then how do we execute it?
Definitely. Sometimes there are others within the agency that help facilitate, or it might be something that they found. Like I mentioned, that Veronica McGregor really got started on Twitter. So we have social media leads at all of the NASA centers. NASA has 10 centers across the country, and so one of the things that I do is hold regular calls with all of those people so that we can all be coordinating and working together and learning from each other as well.
What's one of the things outside of NASA that you're passionate about or that you have going on?
So from a professional perspective, one of the things I'm really passionate about is women in aerospace. The aerospace industry has a more significant underrepresentation of women. I think it's actually similar in tech, but more pronounced perhaps in the aerospace industry, which is historically male-driven. And women represent about 30% of the positions across the aerospace industry. And that includes all the secretarial and executive assistants as well within that 30-ish%. So, we are significantly underrepresented. And part of that is, making sure that the environment is welcoming to women who want to be in the field. And so I'm part of an organization called Women in Aerospace, which is open membership to both men and women, but the idea is that anyone who is a member is interested in promoting opportunities for women in aerospace and within the industry. That ranges from aviation to space and everything in between. So I am the president-elect. I will be the president of that organization in 2012, and I dedicate a significant amount of my time outside of NASA to helping that organization be successful, giving networking opportunities to those who are within the industry, especially youngsters. The WIA Foundation has a scholarship available to women who are college juniors pursuing aerospace careers. So providing them mentoring opportunities and scholarships and everything we can do to help women in the aerospace industry feel connected and networked and have as many opportunities as men do. So one of the other organizations that I'm involved in outside of work is called the Transatlantic Network 2020, and it was set up by the British Council. And the British Council set it up under the goal of connecting young leaders in North America and in Europe so that we would have a better understanding of each other and that build better international relationships. So it's been a very cool group to be a part of because the British Council goes out and finds all these really interesting people who are doing super interesting things across the, mostly in Europe and North America, and then puts us all in a room together to talk about what matters to us, in our peer group, in our various locations, and you can see all the connections even with people who are halfway across the world that, we're concerned about some of the same issues, and we can talk, from an international perspective about how we might tackle those things. And that's just a great group to be a part of because it exposes me to people internationally who are about my age, who are, about the same part of their career. So, really trying to make a difference and do interesting things. And, my Facebook feed every morning when I get up is filled with all of those people and all the cool things that matter to them. And I get such a broader international perspective of what matters to the world instead of this very sort of U.S.-centric.
What is your message that you would have for young professionals or students that are just starting to come into their own? What would you suggest to them, given your background, having the opportunity to kind of be around before social media, be one of the facilitators of how social media is used with such a traditional agency that NASA is? What would you recommend to them, or some advice, some best practices and advice from you?
So from a just, general perspective of just out of college, starting your career, I think it's important to know that you don't have to know what you're going to do in 5 years. And social media is the perfect example of that. I was not hired at NASA to do social media. I evolved into the role as it became, a tool that people used. So being open to trying new things and to being flexible and to thinking, you also don't have to put yourself in a box of this is my 10-year plan of what I'm going to achieve, because the landscape in your field may look completely different in 10 years. So, it's important also to stay on top of things, right? To be an eager learner and reader. Your education doesn't stop when you leave the school doors. Your job is to go out and improve your field, whether it's communications or, something else. You are not just going to take and copy what's been done before. Ideally, you are going to make the field better. Your contributions, your learning, and your experience are going to contribute to the expertise within the field. And so you need to be seeking out the people who are experts, right? And also being willing to think creatively about new things, because then you can become an expert in a new area.
Young professionals tend to struggle with new things. Let's call it failures, where they have ideas, they get things that they're excited about or passionate about, but they run into closed doors or are met with failure. What would you say to the people that are running into those problems now, or maybe some advice on how to overcome that?
When somebody is critical of your idea or of your project or of you, the best thing that you can do, the most value that you can get out of that, is to honestly look at what they're saying and boil it down to where's the truth in what they're saying, and take that truth and see what, can anything be done about it, yes or no? If something can be done about it, what can be done about it? What changes can you make? You can learn so much if you're willing to set aside the, he didn't like my project, or, doesn't like me, to try to figure out the why behind it and what can be done to, it might just be changing one little thing, right? And asking the question of why. Why don't you like the project? What concerns do you have? What risks are you concerned about? And really delving into that aspect of understanding why people are being